Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Cinema Courtroom jury, it is I, your one and only galactic host and judge, Makram Mark, who is proud to be continuing the launch of a limited podcast series where all that we'll be talking about is the rest of the Godfather series, part 2 and 3. In the last episode, we reviewed The Godfather Part 1 in great length, and now we're moving on to Part 2. If you haven't watched it, then I encourage you to watch the previous episode before jumping into this one. Or better yet, watch The Godfather if you haven't done so already, as that's the only way for you to appreciate the second installment. Continuing off with The Godfather Part 2 in this Cinema Courtroom opening hearing for Friday, November 4th, 2022. If you happen to be tuning into this podcast for the very first time ever, whether it be through Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or better yet, the Cinema Courtroom YouTube feed, while you may not be Don Carlone when it comes to doing favors, do me a rather simple one and click the thumbs up or follow button, because we also cover a bunch of other blockbuster pictures that aren't just limited to The Godfather, including old and new releases. Furthermore, it is absolutely vital for your listening pleasure to tune in to this RSS feed weekly. And I mean, who knows? You might find something that you might like or want to get introduced to for the first time ever. Now, without further ado, let us begin with our review topic, The Godfather Part 2. I don't know how this movie does it, you guys, but Godfather 2 actually tells a cohesive narrative. And although it is longer than the first one, if I were to describe The Godfather Part 2 in only 3 words, it would be this sentence: the ultimate upgrade. Period. First and foremost, if you're wondering why Robert De Niro is a respectable actor in the cinema industry, this movie will answer that very specific question and much more. Considering that Marlon Brando played Don Vito, Robert De Niro, who's less popular than he currently is now, had big shoes to fill. And the thing that you have to understand is that Marlon Brando was arguably the substantial contributing factor to what made Godfather Part 1 inventive in the first place. From the opening line where he says, "I'll make him an offer that they can't refuse," to later in the Part 1 movie where he weeps over Sonny's death and asks for him to be cleaned up so that his mother won't see the damage in explicit detail. It was just an emotional performance all around. So to have Robert De Niro play a younger version of him in The Godfather Part 2 is basically asking him to win a lottery again. Much more, Robert De Niro has to win the lottery again on the behest of another actor playing the same character. So what I mean by that is that he didn't play the character in Part 1, so how the hell is he supposed to play a character that the audience already knows? Especially since he's fresh in the game. The question that I'm going to answer now is, did Robert De Niro win such a lottery? Or was it a hit and miss? Because it may as well could have been. Well, I'm proud to say that, hell yeah, he did. In The Godfather Part 2, Vito retained the charisma that older Vito did. We still see him as this persuasive character who would make you an offer that you can't refuse, the one that you can always ask or call in a favor from. Okay, so I conversed a bit about Robert De Niro's acting performance. But what about Al Capino as Michael Corleone? Did he win the lottery again? I mean, he has no excuse to flunk this movie because he's the same actor playing the same character. So surely he picked up on what to improve upon the elements from the first movie when it comes to his acting performance and carried it on to The Godfather Part 2. Well, here's my answer. If the phrase, hell yeah, was money, I would be living in poverty if I was giving money for that phrase. If I was receiving money for every time that was used, then I'd be filthy rich. Because hell yeah, Al Capino as Michael Corleone was amazing. I want to highlight a significant scene from The Godfather Part 2 motion picture where Michael kissed his brother Fredo in Cuba. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought that Al Capino was actually being betrayed by John Cazale. You know, the two actors on screen, they are like the characters who they're playing in the movie. You know how in the first Godfather, there's this one guy who was like, he wanted to get an acting role, so he asked Vito to, hook him up with a Hollywood executive, I think. Yeah, and then he's like, one of the bases that he used, was that I don't need to act. I am this character. Well, I could say the same about Al Capino and John Cazale. Both of them were just awesome in the way that they were convincing enough to just make this a real story about betrayal. And this is where I now want to get into some of the plot aspects for this movie in regards to all of the betrayal plot lines. If I were to summarize the plot for The Godfather Part 2, it would be a cautionary tale of someone trying to expand an empire, and then amidst the lurking danger, a family member backstabs him and then shit starts to splatter the ceiling. I'll even go as far as to say that the events that took place in this Godfather movie might very well be the worst moments of Michael Corleone's life. In the flashback in the end of the movie, when Michael tells his brother that he dropped out of college to join the Marines, Sonny ridiculed him. I'm not gonna lie, but when I watched that scene, it broke my heart, man. Yup, I said it. I actually felt something when watching this movie. Imagine making a decision that you just think is good for you, and then have someone ridicule you for it. And you know what? Going back to the acting performance in this movie, I think that's the bit that moved me from the flashback. Al Capino's acting in that scene, I don't know why, but the plot for this movie is truly a cautionary tale, as I've said. When Michael sits by himself in the family compound in the present day, it was even more heart-shattering and tragic. I want to get into 3 more quick things about the movie, and I'll get back to the ending with Michael in just a moment. I want to explore how Italian immigration and prejudice was covered in this movie. In the opening of the first act of Godfather Part 2, we see young Vito Corleone, and the other Italian people start to arrive in New York. The scene where young Vito needs a translator in order to communicate with the immigration officers, that scene alone tells you everything that you need to know about how immigration is daunting and alienating. Not to mention that Vito lost his mother, so the grief is still fresh in his conscience, but he is just so fixated on retreating for his safety that he has to focus on that instead. And on top of that, as an immigrant, he must learn English in order to speak with other natives. He can't just speak Italian. And then we get to see Italian prejudice, of course. And I mean, what some of you might be saying is rather quite interesting, and I want to highlight it. It turns out that Godfather contributed to this prejudice of Italians, because now most people see Italians in the media as only eating Italian food, mafia bosses, and violent crime lords. At the same time, though, and I'm not going to say the actual word because it's very offensive, the way that the G slur is being used to describe the Italians is informative and accurate of how Italians were treated, spoken to, and just perceived overall in the Godfather movie, and in real life. And I think that's what art does. It imitates life, but twists it into an epic story, essentially putting ketchup on to burnt food so that the audience can swallow it. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Michael and Kay in this movie, though. How crazy was it when Michael got word that Kay had a miscarriage? And then, plot twist, Kay reveals that it was an abortion. The scene where Michael and Kay are having an intense argument and Michael hits her was brilliant. Don't get your mind in the gutter. Obviously, the act itself was disgusting, but the quality of that scene was brilliant. I would like to quickly talk about the ending for a second. I already talked about the last flashback scene and Michael sitting alone in a family compound, but as someone who is very fascinated with the Romans, the reference to how the failed plotters against the Roman Empire would commit suicide as a means to, express indulgence was kind of what made Roth's death predictable. At the same time, the foreshadowing was spot on. The Cinema Courtroom contends that Godfather Part 2 is more than just a sequel. Most sequels are out to consolidate box office bank, but Godfather Part 2's main ambition is to achieve, dare I say, it was achieved impeccably, an excellent and cohesive narrative. The Godfather Part 2 is nothing short of an absolute gem of the 20th century. No mafia picture can live up to such gems, just as you can't beat Superman with a fist. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we begin to approach what Pippin likes to call second breakfast in Fellowship of the Ring, and what many people like to call dessert after a main course meal, which is the Godfather Part 2 review. But now we are going to approach the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing, you may ask? Well, I'm rather glad you inquired about this, because in the first half of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, we reviewed The Godfather Part 2, which is one of many films that I have selected. Because, see, I don't only review The Godfather Part 2, I review films of various different genres, and whether or not they're old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. This is all we do for the first half. But then, in the second half of this podcast, and listen very carefully, because this is where I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general, movie news and movie relevant subjects that aren't just limited to one specific picture and integrated into one post-sentencing hearing list, which you're about to hear very shortly. Think of it as an after party that is long overdue, where you, yes you, the amazing listeners tuning in on Spotify, Stitcher, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Amazon, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, where you're going to gain exclusive access to videos that you're not going to get on Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Amazon. And another way you can describe the post-sentencing hearing is, in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial in order to rectify an existing but unfair hearing. Because sometimes, like the organic sapient that I find myself to be, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So the majority of the time, or all of the time really, because, let's face it, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two, which means I am compelled to review that movie again right here in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show. If you enjoy what you've heard in the first half and what I'm about to say in the second half, if you have done so already and you'd feel so inclined, I would very much appreciate it if you give this podcast a reshare and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up or heart icon. That being said, I commend you in advance for your generous engagement and support. We are going to cover the following: how long until Batman 2 comes out, Avatar 2's runtime, and whether or not we need a Fantastic Beasts 4. And while we're at it, I'm also going to throw in a comment reading session.
I'm vengeance.
It looks like Nirvana wasn't wrong when they said something was in the way, because obviously something is in the way of the Batman sequel releasing. A new report by Variety indicates that not only is the Batman not releasing until the year 2025, but Matt Reeves, who directed and co-produced the Batman, has not delivered a final script yet to the studio. Alright, so one thing in particular that amuses me about this report: why is there even a report like this in the first place? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not disagreeing with it. On the contrary, the Batman needs to take its time for the sequel. But what I'm really trying to say is, why is that report making it as if the Batman not coming out until a later date is bad news? I don't know about you guys, but I'm gonna happily wait for the sequel, however long that it takes for it to get out. For as long as that waiting time is justified, and that, the filmmakers are utilizing that time productively and making it the best Batman sequel it can be. And also using that time in making the sequel just as good, if not better, than the first Batman movie. Ideally, a sequel must always be better. Otherwise, the sequel won't be able to achieve its function, because the sequel is an extension to the first movie, by definition. So, it has to be just as good as that movie, or even better, because think of the sequel as the third act of the first movie, because now you're prolonging the story and giving it another ending. And while one would argue people can lose interest over an extended period of time, because after all, we have to wait for 3 more years? I mean, yeah, if you're waiting for Bob the Farting Super Pigeon Part 2. But this isn't Bob the Farting Super Pigeon Part 2. This is Batman we're talking about. I highly doubt that the interest is going to die down in 3 years' time, especially since we've had a century of Batman. Enough said. What do you think about the long waiting time for Batman 2? Are you like me and think that it's going to be worth the wait? Or maybe you're very pessimistic about this news. I mean, hey, I'm bummed out too in some ways. I love Batman. Whatever your thoughts are, and if you love Batman too, let me know in the comment section below or at our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Avatar, Avatar, Avatar. There, I said it 3 times. 3 is the magic number, ladies and gentlemen, because that's the number of Avatar's 2 reported runtime. According to Deadline, Avatar, The Way of Water's runtime is expected to clock in over 3 hours long, making the sequel at least 20 minutes longer than its predecessor. At the same time, though, even though the Avatar sequel is only more than a month away, the final cut of the movie hasn't been finalized yet. Okay, look. James Cameron is directing this movie, just as he did with the first Avatar film. And something you have to remember about James Cameron's directing style is that his movies love to tell a story about romance in a colossal way. When he did Titanic, that was 3 hours long. The first Avatar movie, which involved a romance between a human with an alien consciousness and an alien with an alien consciousness, was very long. Am I the only one who is sensing a pattern here? I mean, guys, the verdict on Avatar's 2 runtime is relatively straightforward here. It's all about family and romantic pursuits. Duh. But no, for real. The first Avatar movie is kind of difficult to remember on the spot. And I don't want to spend time trying to, recollect it because it's going to be too long. Like, I honestly don't remember the last time I watched this movie. I might have to rewatch it again before I watch the Avatar sequel. Other than that, I'm always into pictures that have a longer runtime. Because let's face it, you only get one movie. Why waste its potential and vision just to trim it on the editing board to a shorter runtime? I think Avatar 2 having a 3-hour runtime means that it has a lot of story to tell, which is excellent. At least that's my take on this reported news. What is your take on Avatar 2's apparent runtime? Do you think it's too short? Do you think that you might doze off watching a 3-hour movie? I mean, hey, when you're watching a movie for the first time, it's natural to doze off when the movie ends up being too long. But maybe if you appreciate the movie later down the road, you might be like, oh yeah, it should have been longer. I don't know. Your mind is your own. So I would very much like to hear what's in it and whatever your perceptions about the Avatar runtime are by letting me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.
Hello there.
Rest in peace, Robbie Coltrane, who unfortunately passed away very recently. You were the impeccable Hagrid. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are yet again going to cover another subject that pertains to the cinematic wizarding world. Do we need a Fantastic Beasts 4? Yes, we do, in my opinion. And here is why I think that. The story has a lot of ground that it's meant to cover. For one, where the heck is the fight where Grindelwald loses the Elder Wand to Dumbledore? There isn't at least one piece of dialogue that mentions the Elder Wand through those movies. And you know what? Maybe we want to save that for another movie. Maybe this is where Fantastic Beasts 4 might be beneficial to the Wizarding World cinematic universe. Maybe they can make the fourth film based on the final duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. The blood pact between Dumbledore and Grindelwald has been broken, so why not follow up on that crucial plot point? Give us some catharsis, and then have the 5th and 6th movie be about Newt Scamander, exploring some new creatures, which after all is what Fantastic Beasts is all about. Or another thing they could also do is expand on a legacy character's backstory. Unlike Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts still has a lot of prequel nuggies to finish off on their plates. I might be rambling here, but I am still answering the question of if we need a Fantastic Beasts 4. And I think that we do. Not only because I adore those movies, but because Fantastic Beasts is a commitment to Wizarding World fans, including myself, that they would do well to honor. And if not, then we're just left with loose endings and whatnot. Do you think the idea of a Fantastic Beasts 4 is far-fetched, or maybe you're on the fence? I definitely am not. I want there to be a Fantastic Beasts 4. Whatever you think about Fantastic Beasts 4 or Fantastic Beasts in general, let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox. Seeing that we've talked about something that is related to the Wizarding World, there would have been no Wizarding anything without J.K. Rowling. Now, that other day I talked about the J.K. Rowling controversy and Tom Felton's response to that. And I got a comment on that exact segment because I cut it down into parts and then released it as one clip on YouTube. You know, it's my way of like trying to increase viewership. So as we finish off this segment, I'm going to experiment with something that I would like to do at the end of every post-sentencing hearing. Once in a while, I might get a comment from one of my listeners. And I'm not going to do this in every episode, but I feel like doing it now. Every once in a while, I'm going to read it out and share, just a slice of the pie, mind you, of my opinionated response. It might even give you an idea of, like, when I read your comments, what's my thought process, so to speak. It's also going to be uncensored. Without further ado, the shout out for the post sentencing hearing comments reading goes to J. Ruse. J. Ruse had sent this following comment a few days ago in response to my, as I mentioned before, segment about the J.K. Rowling controversy. And I'm going to read it exactly as it is. J. Ruse said, I don't understand why anyone would take issue with what Rowling has said. I found it incredibly ridiculous that the ones screaming for freedom of expression, speech, and lifestyle are the only ones screaming to shut everyone with differing opinions up. The hypocrisy and intolerance has made me very unsympathetic and unsupportive of the LGBTQ community and any Hollywood panderers. I feel the same toward feminism. It's like women have gotten so much of what they/we, in brackets, J. Ruse pointed out that she is a woman, have wanted, but are totally ungrateful and unsatisfied. It's like there's an addiction to victimhood and self-pity. Thank you, J. Ruse, for your fascinating perspective here. And it's also fascinating that you shared your perspective as a woman. From the way that I see it, as a guy, obviously, feminism, according to how you described it, and I'm not saying that I disagree or concur with it either, but it looks like feminism, or toxic third wave feminism, however you like to call it, is being elevated by women the majority of the time. And the people who are in direct opposition to this type of feminism, whether it be for better or worse, again, it depends on your viewpoints, right? Just happen to be male individuals. Having established that, the fact that you are saying that women are totally ungrateful and unsatisfied with what they are given, and I don't want to misquote you, because you also took care to mention that they already got what they wanted. But the fact that you made that assertion as a woman yourself is really effective from a formal debate standpoint. And it doesn't matter whether one agrees with the issue or not. Sometimes in a formal debate, you kind of have to argue as the devil's advocate. And here's why I think that is a very effective position that you have. I've observed enough debate tournaments to know that by utilizing your own personal experience, whether it be in regards to ethnicity, sex, whatever, in order to solidify your position, could really bring your argument home. I'll share with you an example. I was spectating this debate, and I think it was about immigration or something. I don't recall exactly, but one of the debaters literally stood up to assert one of his points, and he grabbed his passport from his back pocket almost instantly to bring his argument home. He had direct proof to substantiate his points about immigration, because I'm going to call him Bob. Bob talked about his experience, and by talking about his own experience, everyone was just speechless. Because it wasn't just anyone talking out of their ass. This was an actual person living what they were saying. Another thing that I would like to say when it comes to my perspective from reading your commentaries is that I myself am not a big fan of echo chambers, especially in the cinema industry. I honestly find the prospect of having to agree on everything, including movies, very stupid. We have to collectively learn to agree and disagree. The beauty of pop culture, which is what drawn me into it in the first place, is the idea that we can grasp the initiative to foster constructive debate of the movies that we love or the movies that we love to hate. The pop culture community, especially its online forums, is meant to be a harbor from all of the bitterness in the world, where we can just argue about fiction instead of the politics behind feeding a skinny-ass child who lives in a desolated region across the world, while a rich person thinks their life is hard because they woke up on the wrong side of the bed one morning. And I find that sometimes the way that fictional stories portray real events and issues can be debated in substantial length too. And I know that this is an extensive response, so I'll speed things up if you don't mind. But in regards to what you said about the LGBTQ, maybe you have the right to be fed up and agitated with how those so-called activists want to virtue signal honest to God movie pundits for having to, share a different opinion. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that we should be intolerant or sympathetic. Unsympathetic. I mean, pop culture is a safe place. And that pretty much extends to everyone. Whether you are left or right, or anywhere in between, whether you are of a certain ethnicity or religion, whether you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, whoever you are, which is a catalog of many unique attributes, and whatever your identity is, so long as it isn't infested with harmful ideologies such as, advocating for racism, genocide, bigotry, stuff like that, then there is a place available for you on the pop culture table, signed with your name on it in premium ink. No one, including you, has the right to pull another person's chair away, so to speak. In that same respect, I want you to feel welcome in the pop culture community as well. But just keep in mind that this goes both ways. Just as you should feel welcomed, you should also welcome others. I have a question for you, J. Roos. Where do you think we should draw the line, if any, when it comes to sharing opinions? I would be very interested in your answer to this question. So once again, a big shout out to you, J. Roos, for giving me something to talk about. Feel free to send another comment if there's anything else that you'd like to add, and I'll be happy to follow up on that at a later date. And if not, well, I hope you enjoyed your few minutes, it might be more than a few minutes, in the spotlight. To the listeners tuning in, let me know what you think about J. Roos' comment and my reply to it in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom Show, where we critique movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the 22nd episode of the Cinema Courtroom, just as I do every week, making them just for you. I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, where we're going to talk about The Godfather Part 3. Find out my insights on The Godfather 3 when the next and 23rd episode of the Cinema Courtroom Show launches this coming Tuesday. Yes, this week, guys, just a few days from now, on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Anchor, and Amazon. Thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your Galactic Judge Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular day.
Hello there.
Court is now dismissed.